The moment my mother walked through my front door after 9 years of silence, she wasn't carrying an apology. She was carrying a list of demands. She stood in my living room, the living room she never knew existed, in the house she never visited, in the life she tried to destroy, and she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You owe this family, Cassandra. You always have." I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not grief, something quieter and far more dangerous. Because the woman standing in front of me had no idea who I had become. She remembered the girl she threw away. She didn't know the woman who had been built from the wreckage. Before I let her say another word, I thought back to the night it all began, the night I stood outside my parents' front door in the pouring rain with a garbage bag full of my belongings, listening to my father change the locks. My crime? Falling in love with the wrong man. At least, that's what they called it. I called it the best decision I ever made. And by the time this story is over, you'll understand exactly why. If you've ever been told that love is conditional, that family loyalty means swallowing your own happiness, or that choosing yourself is a betrayal, this story is for you. Stay with me. Because what happened next took 9 years to unfold, and every single second was worth it. My name is Cassandra Whitmore, and I was raised in a picture-perfect suburban home in Naperville, Illinois. My father, Gerald Whitmore, was a real estate developer. My mother, Patricia, chaired church committees, hosted neighborhood fundraisers, and made sure everyone within 10 miles knew exactly how successful the Whitmore family was. Presentation was everything to Patricia Whitmore. I was the oldest of 3. My brother Derek was 2 years younger and could do absolutely no wrong in my parents' eyes. He flunked out of his first college, had my father pay for a second one, and spent most of his 20s borrowing money he never paid back. But he was funny at dinner and told my father what he wanted to hear. My mother once said, when she didn't know I was listening, that Derek was the one who gets it. My younger sister Rachel was 7 years younger, soft-spoken, gentle, the peacekeeper. She floated through family dinners like a leaf on still water. She was kind. I always loved that about her. And then there was me, Cassandra, the achiever. Straight A's, full scholarship, finance degree with honors job at a respected Chicago investment firm. The one they bragged about. But bragging about and loving unconditionally are very different things. I didn't know that yet. I was 26 when I met Marcus Ellison at a downtown Chicago conference on a Tuesday afternoon that felt completely ordinary, until it suddenly wasn't. He was presenting a case study on urban development financing. He said something so precise and unexpected that I laughed out loud in a room full of people who were professionally not laughing. He found me at the coffee station during the break, handed me a cup, black, which was not what I took, and said, "You have a great laugh. You should use it more in professional settings. It makes people nervous, and I find that useful." I stared at him. He smiled. That was the whole beginning. Marcus was 30, a financial consultant who'd built his own firm from scratch. He was smart in a way that made you feel smarter just by proximity. He was warm, funny, and held doors not because he was performing chivalry, but because it genuinely didn't occur to him not to. He was also black, and in my mother's meticulously curated world of Sunday brunches and country club dinners, that was not a detail they would overlook. I knew that immediately, the way you know a storm is coming before the clouds arrive. But Marcus was the first person who had ever made me feel like myself. Not the Cassandra who achieved and impressed and sent money home. Just me, Cassandra who laughed too loud, who had opinions and fears and a persistent sense that her whole life had been built for someone else's approval. Marcus saw that woman. He wanted that woman. And I was 26 years old and deeply, completely, irreversibly in love. We dated for 8 months, 8 months of building something real and honest. He introduced me to his family, his mother Diane, his sister Kaisha, and his grandmother Mrs. Ellison, who called me baby and pressed a tin of homemade cookies into my hands the first time I walked through her door. His family welcomed me with no conditions and no asterisks. None. I waited too long to tell my parents. Really, I was waiting for courage I kept misplacing. When I finally told them, a Sunday dinner in October leaves orange outside, my mother's first question was not, "What's he like?" or "Are you happy?" It was, "What does he do?" The credential check. I told her he ran his own financial consulting firm, My father raised an eyebrow, slightly impressed. Then, and his family? I held the moment for exactly 2 seconds before saying calmly that Marcus was black, that his family was wonderful, and that I hoped they'd get to meet him soon. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. My mother set down her fork, slowly, the way she set things down when she was composing herself. She said, "Cassandra, no, just that, like I'd suggested something wildly impractical." I told her it wasn't a question, that I was 26 years old and telling them as a courtesy about someone important in my life. My father looked up, and the expression on his face was something I hadn't seen before, not anger exactly. Something colder. He said, "You need to think very carefully about what you're choosing here, Cassandra. About what this family represents, and whether you want to be a part of it." I said I already had. What followed were weeks of pressure. Phone calls from my mother that started with fake casualness and moved quickly to manipulation, long speeches about community standards, what people would think, how hard my parents had worked to build their name. My grandmother was recruited. She called and told me I was breaking the family. Aunt Lorraine sent an actual card expressing her deep concern for my future. None of these people asked me how I felt. Not one question about Marcus as a person, his character, his values, his kindness. He was reduced to a single descriptor as though everything he was could be erased by one word. Marcus was calm about it in the way that spoke to a lifetime of navigating spaces that required that kind of calm. He held my hand when I cried. He told me I didn't owe anyone my choices, and that he'd understand if I needed time, distance, or even if I chose differently. He said it without pressure or manipulation. I loved him even more for it. I didn't choose differently. 6 months later, Marcus proposed on a quiet Tuesday night in his kitchen, mid-argument about whether risotto required constant stirring. He pulled a ring from his sweatshirt pocket like it was the most natural thing, his grandmother's ring, reset in a modern setting. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called my parents. My mother answered. I told her we were engaged. She said, "Then you have made your choice." "And you have made our choice for us." And she hung up. 3 days later, a letter arrived on Whitmore family letterhead as though this were a business transaction. It informed me that I was no longer welcome in my parents' home, that my name had been removed from my father's estate documents, and that if I proceeded with this marriage, I should not expect any further contact from the family. It was signed by both my parents. Derek's name was not on it, but I found out later he had been in the room when they wrote it. Rachel called me the next morning, crying. She loved me. She was so sorry. But she couldn't go against them. She had a daughter, was recently divorced, and was financially dependent on my parents in ways that made defiance feel impossible. I understood. I was heartbroken, but I understood. The night before my wedding, I sat in Marcus's grandmother's living room eating cookies from that same tin, and Mrs. Ellison held my hands and said, "Baby, some people have to lose something to understand its value. You just make sure you don't lose yourself waiting for them to learn that lesson." I didn't know how long that lesson would take. I didn't know it would take 9 years. Our wedding was small and perfect. 43 people, early spring, flowers everywhere. Marcus cried when he saw me. His mother danced with every single guest. His sister Kaisha gave a toast that was somehow both hilarious and the most moving thing I've ever heard. There was joy in every corner of that room. Every single corner. Except the one in my own chest, where I felt the absence of my family like a bruise I kept pressing. But I danced, I laughed. I married the best man I had ever known. The first years were a beautiful kind of hard, learning each other, building towards something. We bought a house in Evanston 2 years after the wedding. When we got the keys, I cried in the kitchen, because I realized I was standing in a home that was completely and entirely mine. Ours. Something no one could take from me. Marcus's family became my family in every practical and daily sense. Diane called me every Sunday, not to check on me in the pointed way my mother used to, but because she wanted to hear my voice. Kaisha and I became real friends, the send memes at midnight kind. Mrs. Ellison made me a quilt for our 2nd anniversary with a note. "You are the daughter I picked." I kept that note in my knitstand. Professionally, I built a reputation quietly. At the 4-year mark of our marriage, I was offered a senior portfolio management position, a significant salary increase, and a team of 7. Marcus's firm had grown from 3 people to a proper company with offices in Chicago and Atlanta. We were stable in a way that felt every single day like freedom. At the 5-year mark, something happened that changed everything inside me. We found out we were pregnant. We'd been quietly trying for 2 years. When it happened, it felt like the universe making a statement. Marcus built a crib, by hand, over 3 weekends in the garage, consulting YouTube at midnight and refusing all offers of help. When he finally called me out to see it, he was so visibly proud that I had to look away so he wouldn't see me cry. We had a son. Theodore Gerald Ellison. 7 pounds 2 ounces, born in February with Marcus's eyes and an attitude that made the nurses laugh. I called Rachel from the hospital, she cried. She congratulated me. She told me not to post on Facebook because Mom monitors everything. I held my son and thought about my mother. And for the first time in 5 years, the thought didn't feel like grief. It felt like clarity. She had chosen her pride over me. I had gotten a child and a husband and a life. I knew which of us had lost more. Theo was 2 when Rachel finally broke. She called on a Thursday night, voice low, hiding somewhere in her own house. She told me my father had been quietly reorganizing his estate for months. Derek was getting majority control of the real estate holdings. Rachel was getting a small amount. My name wasn't in any document. That part didn't surprise me. But then Rachel said the part that took my breath away. My mother had told Derek that when she and my father passed, there was a storage unit containing my grandmother's belongings, jewelry, antiques, a collection of items that had been promised to me by my grandmother herself, in writing, when I was 19 years old. I remembered that promise. My grandmother had made it at Thanksgiving, in front of witnesses, and given me a letter confirming it. I had kept that letter. Even at 19, I had some instinct for documentation. Rachel said those items would go to Derek, that the letter I'd been given was not a real legal document. According to my father. I thought about my grandmother, who had pressed my hands in her soft ones and looked me in the eyes and said she wanted me to have her mother's brooch, her dining set, her china, and the pearl earrings she wore on her wedding day. Items with no extraordinary monetary value but incalculable personal significance. Items that were not my parents to give away. Then Rachel told me the final thing. My grandmother had passed when Theo was 8 months old. My mother didn't call me. I wasn't told in time to attend the funeral. I found out I had missed my grandmother's funeral by a text. 2 days later. And something inside me that had been very quiet for a very long time became something else entirely. I'm not a vengeful person. I had spent 5 years actively choosing to build rather than grieve what I'd lost. But there is a difference between choosing peace and accepting injustice. And I was done being quiet. The planning took 8 months. I am a portfolio manager by profession. I manage risk. I build strategies. I play long. The first thing I did was call my attorney, Daniel Forsyth. I brought everything, the letter of intent, dated and witnessed, written in my grandmother's hand and confirmed by a notary. Daniel told me the document was unusually specific, notarized, and had enough legal language to be meaningful. Whether a challenge would succeed depended on whether those items were still identifiable in Derek's possession. The second thing I did was track down my grandmother's attorney. It took 4 calls and 2 letters. He was retired, 73, living in Scottsdale, Arizona. His name was Howard Bell. He remembered my grandmother. He remembered drafting the letter of intent. He had a copy in his files. Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes, he told me. She came to me twice about it. She wanted to be certain. I had to cover my mouth. I still have the original signed copy, he said, with witness signatures and my notary seal. Would you like me to send it to you? Yes, I would. The third piece was financial intelligence, nothing illegal, just public records. Marcus helped me research my father's business filings. What we found was that Whitmore Development LLC had taken on significant debt. 2 large projects had underperformed. A third was in litigation. The transfer of assets to Derek's name might not be entirely about cutting me out. It might also be about restructuring liability. I filed that away. The fourth thing I did was keep living my life. Keep going to work, keep loving my husband. Keep raising my son. At the 6-year mark of our marriage, I opened Compass Financial Group, a boutique firm focused on women going through major life transitions. I had watched my sister trapped in financial dependency like a locked room. I had watched my mother wield financial control as a weapon. I knew what it looked like when women didn't have financial knowledge, and I knew what it looked like when they did. Within 2 years, we had a waiting list. Within 3, we'd been featured in a national outlet focused on women in finance. Marcus watched it all unfold with a quiet pride that needed no announcement, the same face he made when he finished building Theo's crib. I was building something entirely, specifically, undeniably mine. Derek, who had been handed the keys to my father's real estate empire, turned out to be exactly the person anyone paying attention would have expected. In the 7th year since my disownment, Rachel told me he had refinanced 2 properties without telling my father, taken out equity for a personal investment that collapsed, and was now facing difficult questions from the bank. And then my parents did what they had always done. They asked the person who had never been given anything to cover for the person who had been given everything. They asked Rachel to put her small savings toward Derek's financial mess. Because family. Because family, Rachel told me on the phone. Her voice was very flat. "Cass," she said. "How did you do it?" She wasn't asking about my career. She was asking how I had walked away. How I had stood in the pouring rain with a garbage bag full of my life and found a way to keep going. I told her the truth. I had walked away, and then I had walked toward something. The walking toward was the part that mattered. I told her my guest room was always available. She didn't come. Not yet, but I heard something shift in her voice. The year my mother came back started with a letter. I recognized the irony. The family that sent me a letter of termination sent me a letter of return. It was handwritten, my mother's neat, controlled cursive. She wrote that she had been reflecting, that she missed her daughter, that things had been difficult and she believed I could help. She did not apologize. She referenced my success in finance and my good connections. She signed it Mom. I read that letter 3 times. I showed it to Marcus. He read it once, handed it back, and said very carefully, "What do you want to do?" I thought about it for a week. I thought about the 19-year-old girl who cried herself to sleep after that first phone call, about standing in the rain with changed locks, about missing my grandmother's funeral, about the letter in Howard Bell's files, still waiting. But I also thought about the fact that I was 35 years old, and I had built a life of such deliberate intention that I was genuinely no longer afraid of any member of my family. That was new. That was worth something. I wrote back. I told my mother I was willing to have a conversation. I gave her a date and my address. I told her Marcus would be present, and that if those conditions were not acceptable, the door would not open again. She replied within 2 days. She would be there. I spent the time between her letter and her arrival doing 3 things. First, I met with Daniel Forsyth and finalized the legal claim. We had Howard Bell's signed original, witness statements from 2 family friends, and documentation showing the items had been transferred to Derek with no record of the letter of intent. Daniel filed a formal legal notice. Derek was served. My parents received a copy. This happened 4 days before my mother's visit, deliberately, so it could not be presented as a reaction to whatever she planned to ask of me. Second, I talked to Theo. He was 6 full of opinions and deeply committed to his dinosaur pajamas. I told him that Grandma Patricia would be coming, that she was someone I hadn't seen in a long time, and that we'd be polite and kind.
He thought about this seriously and asked if she liked dinosaurs. I told him I honestly didn't know.
He said, "She can borrow my book about stegosauruses if she wants. I love my son with a force that defies all language."
Third, I called Rachel. She arrived the night before my mother did, with 1 suitcase and her daughter Lily, who was 9 and had Rachel's exact eyes and a ferocious confidence that made me want to cry with joy. Lily and Theo were in each other's pocket within 20 minutes. Rachel and I sat in my kitchen at midnight drinking tea and talking properly for the first time in 9 years. Not carefully. Not with half a mind on what our mother might think. Just talking. I told her everything, the letter of intent, Daniel, Howard Bell in Scottsdale. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You kept the letter." "I kept everything," I said. Rachel looked at me across the kitchen island and said, "I always knew you were the smart one." I used to think that was a compliment they gave you to make up for all the other things. It wasn't a compliment, I said. No, she agreed. But it was true. We laughed until we were crying, and then we were just crying, and then Rachel said she thought she was ready to stop being the quiet one. I told her it was about time. My mother arrived at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. She sat in the driveway for 4 full minutes before she got out. I watched from the kitchen window. Marcus came and stood beside me without a word. I watched her walk up the path of my house, the house she'd never visited, the life she'd never validated, and ring my doorbell. I felt the strangest thing. Not anger, not triumph, just a settled certainty. I knew exactly who I was. She was about to find out. 9 years is a long time to not see your mother. She looked the same, and she looked older. She had that careful, composed expression she always used in uncertain situations, the smile that was 3% warmth and 97% strategy. She said, "Cassandra, you look wonderful." I said, "Come in, Mom." Marcus was in the living room. He stood when she entered and extended his hand with the steady, dignified grace I had loved in him from the beginning. "Hello, Patricia. I'm glad you came." My mother looked at his hand for a fraction of a second too long. Then she shook it. Rachel appeared from the kitchen doorway. My mother's composure slipped, genuine surprise. Rachel said, "Hi, Mom," in the old, quiet way, but her shoulders were straight in a new way. Theo appeared briefly, assessed the situation with 6-year-old precision, announced there was a stegosaurus on his shirt, and retreated to the backyard with Lily. My mother watched him go. Something moved across her face. I let the moment be whatever it was. My mother talked for some time. She referenced my father's health. Serious, apparently. She talked about the situation with Derek in vague terms, about financial pressures and property challenges, about needing guidance. She used many synonyms for the word rescue. She talked for a long time without saying sorry. When she finished, I waited. The room was very quiet. Then I said, "Mom, before we discuss anything, there are some things I need to address." She blinked. She had not expected me to steer. She had expected me to either sob and forgive or storm out. She had not accounted for the version of me that had spent 8 months preparing for this conversation. I said, "I need to address the letter you and Dad sent me 9 years ago. Missing my grandmother's funeral. And the fact that my grandmother's personal property, which she left to me in writing, was transferred to Derek." The color shifted in my mother's face. She started, "Cassandra, that was..." I said, "My attorney filed a legal notice 4 days ago. I want you to know that is already in motion, and it has nothing to do with whatever you're here to discuss today. It would be proceeding regardless." The silence this time was very different from the silence at that dinner table 9 years ago. This silence had no power in it. My mother looked at me, and I could see her searching for the Cassandra she had known. The one who sent money home, the one who needed approval. That woman wasn't here. I said, "I'm not here to punish you. And I'm not here to close a door. But I need something from you before I can give anything back." My mother said nothing. Her hands were in her lap. I said, "I need you to look at the man sitting in this room. The man who has been my partner and my family and my best friend for 9 years. And I need you to say that you were wrong." Rachel inhaled audibly. Marcus was perfectly still. My mother looked at Marcus. And I watched something happen in her that I did not expect. I watched her see him. Not as a symbol or a rejection of her values or a public relations problem, just as a person. Sitting in a beautiful home, with his hand resting near mine, with his son's laughter drifting in from the backyard, with a steadiness in his posture that no amount of resentment could undermine. My mother looked at Marcus and she said, very quietly, "I was wrong." And then she said it again, louder. "I was wrong, and I am sorry. To both of you." Marcus nodded once.
He said, "Thank you, Patricia." 3 words, no performance.
No cruelty and no overcorrection. Just gracious, quiet dignity. I could have married him again in that moment. Rachel was crying. I was not, but just barely. My mother was not crying either, but her composure was genuine now in a way it hadn't been when she walked in. The strategic smile was gone. What was left was just an old woman who had made a very large mistake and was reckoning with what it had cost, that reckoning was hers to carry. I had carried mine long enough. We talked for 3 more hours. Real talking. I told her about Compass Financial Group, our home, Sunday dinners with Diane and Kaisha, Mrs. Ellison's quilt. I showed her a photo of Marcus building Theo's crib. She looked at it for a long time. She asked if she could meet Theo properly. I brought him inside and said, "Theo, this is Grandma Patricia." He looked at her with the direct assessment of a child who has been well loved and therefore has no fear of strangers. Then he went to his room and came back with the Stegosaurus book and handed it to her and said, "This is the best dinosaur. You can look at it." My mother opened the book. She looked at the Stegosaurus. And the woman who had once cared more about appearances than people laughed. Really laughed. For the first time since she had walked through my door. The legal matter was resolved over the following 3 months. Derek, faced with Howard Bell's notarized original and witness statements, did not fight it. The items were returned. My grandmother's brooch. The china, the pearl earrings. I sat with those earrings in my hands for a long time. I thought about my grandmother pressing my hands in hers. I thought about the 73-year-old retired attorney in Scottsdale who had kept a piece of paper in a file for years because he believed in honoring what his clients intended. Regarding my parents' financial situation, I consulted. That is the correct word. I did not rescue. I assessed their situation as I would with any Compass client, identified the specific steps they needed, and connected them with a real estate attorney who specialized in restructuring. I gave them the map. They had to walk the road. With my father, things were harder. When I visited their home for the first time in 9 years, he met me at the door and said, "You turned out well." It was not an apology. I don't think he was capable of the direct form. But I heard in those 4 words a recognition he had spent 9 years not offering. I said, "I know, Dad," and walked inside and helped them figure out what to do next. Not because I owed them. Because I had decided, for reasons entirely my own, that I was capable of love without debt. That's what 9 years had taught me. Rachel eventually told my parents on a regular Wednesday that she was taking a position in Chicago, enrolling in a financial literacy program, and moving with Lily to an apartment near me. My parents said nothing. I think they knew, finally, what it looked like to lose a daughter, and couldn't do it again. Rachel and Lily moved 4 miles from my house. Rachel is studying for her financial certification, the most disciplined student in her cohort. The quiet one had been paying attention to everything, all those years. She was just waiting for permission to speak. She took it on her own. That matters. I am 35 years old, and my life looks like this. I am married to Marcus, who remains the best man I know in all the specific, daily, undramatic ways that actually constitute a good life. We have a son who is 6, deeply in love with dinosaurs, and possessed of a moral certainty that makes Marcus and me regularly look at each other over his head in quiet amazement. I run a firm with 26 clients, a staff of 4, and a wait list. I have a sister who is becoming herself. My parents are in my life in a careful, limited, still being repaired way, not a storybook reunion. A real, imperfect, ongoing negotiation with people who hurt me and are slowly learning different. I have my grandmother's pearl earrings. I wore them to the most recent Compass Financial Group anniversary dinner. Marcus saw me put them in and said, "She would have liked all of this." I think she would have. The day my mother showed up at my door with her demands was the day I understood something I had been learning for 9 years. Conditional love is not love. It is leverage. It wears the costume of love because it needs something back. Real love, the kind I found in Marcus, the kind Diane showed me on day 1, the kind pressed into a tin of cookies by an old woman who didn't know me yet. Real love doesn't need a return. It just arrives and stays and asks for nothing but presence. I was 26 when I chose Marcus and lost my family. I was 35 when my family realized what they had lost. Somewhere in those 9 years, I built a life so full, so genuinely mine, that when my mother walked through my door expecting to find a wound she could leverage, she found a woman who had healed so completely there was room even for her. Not because I needed her, because I had the surplus. That's the part they don't tell you about surviving the people who underestimate you. You don't just survive, you build. And when they finally come to the door of what you've built, the view from inside is incomprehensible to them. Because they never imagined you getting here. But you always knew you would. If you are somewhere in the middle of your own story right now, if you are standing in the rain with a garbage bag, or reading a letter on family letterhead, or sitting at a table where the people who are supposed to love you have decided your love is the wrong kind, I want you to hear this. The people who tell you that you are choosing wrong are the people who need you to make their choices valid. Build anyway. Walk towards something. Find the people who love without conditions and love them back just as freely. Document everything. Keep your grandmother's letter. Trust your instincts. Work in silence. Live loudly. And know, absolutely know, that 9 years from now, or 5 or 15, the people who threw you away will be standing at the door of your life, and what they find there is entirely up to you. Make it something worth finding. I did. And it was worth every single step.